Welcome to the Balanced Badass Podcast, the show for multitaskers determined to stay balanced and badass without losing their minds. Every week, we help you manage your overflowing calendar and household, making sure you still have time to breathe, laugh, and savor that much-needed glass of wine at the end of the day. Think of this podcast as your weekly dose of practical advice, humor, and tough love, just like catching up with a friend who really gets it. I'm Tara Kermit, your personal growth coach, helping you handle how was your day without a meltdown. Now let's get into today's episode.
You know that feeling when your laptop starts overheating? Maybe you've got too many tabs open again, and suddenly the fan's whirring like it's about to take off. You can almost feel the heat radiating from the keyboard, right? But instead of shutting it down, you just keep pushing, hoping that the computer will just magically cool down on its own. That's kind of like your body when you're teetering on the edge of burnout. Your body's like, hey, maybe close a tab or two. But instead you're like, nah, I'll just power through. And just like your laptop, you're probably ignoring all the warning signs until things crash. It's funny, isn't it? We wouldn't dream of letting our laptops run at max capacity for days on end without eventually giving it a break. But when it comes to ourselves, we're like, I'll be fine, until we hit that inevitable wall. I mean, how many times have you told yourself, I just need to get through this week, or I'll take a break once I finish this project, only to find yourself back in the same vicious cycle the next week? We're all guilty of it. It's like we think our bodies are these machines that can go on forever without a hiccup. So quick backstory here. About 6 months ago, I found myself consumed by work. I'd go to sleep worried about it, have nightmares, wake up in a cold sweat thinking about it, eat breakfast while worrying about my meetings for the day, barely take a break for lunch, suck at the work I was doing, and wonder why I was feeling like shit by the end of the week. It's not like I wasn't working hard enough, right? I was giving everything to my job. Too much, actually. But the truth, I was struggling with more than just work stress. It was anxiety, panic attacks, digestive issues. I'll spare you the details, but let's just say my stomach was definitely not happy with me. And imposter syndrome? Oh yeah, that was hanging on to. Whispering in my ear, you're not good enough. Everyone else is handling this just fine. What's wrong with you? And I was taking sick days more frequently than I'd like to admit. Not because I had a cold or the flu, but because I just couldn't drag myself out of bed. My body was throwing in the towel, throwing a tantrum like a kindergartner, and I kept pretending everything was fine. At first, I brushed it off. I mean, who hasn't felt tired or unfocused or anxious about a meeting or like you're not doing enough even when you're literally drowning? But when this went on for weeks and I was still waking up every day feeling like I'd been run over by a truck, I finally had to face the music. I wasn't just stressed. I wasn't just tired. I was deep in burnout territory and I didn't even see it coming. Looking back now, I wish I had paid attention to the warning signs earlier, but hey, hindsight's 20/20, right? It's easy to look back and see all the red flags, but when you're in it, it's hard to recognize what's really happening. It wasn't just the constant stress or feeling like I was never quite caught up. It was the little things too that I ignored. Like how I'd zone out during conversations with friends because my brain was just still stuck on work mode. Or how I'd get irritable over the smallest things. Like the fact that my husband Jay left his pants in the middle of the living room again, it set me off the edge. Sorry, Jay. Thank goodness he is a good human. And let's not even talk about my social life, or I should probably say lack thereof. I started flaking on plans, not because I didn't want to see people, but because I just didn't have the energy to show up. Physically, I would be present, but mentally, completely checked out. I'd make excuses like I was tired or it had just been a busy week, when in reality, I was running on empty and had been for months. My body was basically screaming for me to slow down before it shut down completely. What I didn't realize back then, and what I need you to hear right now, is that burnout is preventable. The signs are always there, screaming for your attention, even if that's a very quiet scream. We just get so caught up in the day-to-day shit that we ignore them. Because we're too tough, we're too capable, and let's be real, sometimes too damn stubborn to admit that we're struggling. But ignoring those signs doesn't make them go away. It just guarantees that they'll hit harder when they finally catch up with you. So if you're hearing yourself in this story right now, if you've been feeling like your body and mind are running on fumes, pay attention. According to the World Health Organization, burnout isn't just about working long hours. It's this trifecta of exhaustion, cynicism, and feeling completely ineffective. Like you're not even sure if anything you're doing even matters anymore. You're pouring all this time, energy, and effort into your work, your life, your goals, and yet instead of feeling accomplished or satisfied, you're left questioning whether any of it even makes a difference. And that hits hard, right? Because most of us are doing everything we can to keep it together. You're busting your ass every day, and still, you feel like you're running on empty. And it's not just being tired. No, this is like next level exhaustion. It's that bone deep weariness that sleep just doesn't fix. The kind where even your soul feels tired. Like you wake up in the morning, you're not feeling refreshed at all. And all you're thinking is, can I just please go back to bed and skip the day? Every morning feels like you're dragging a boulder up a hill, just trying to get yourself to do the basic things. You get through the day on autopilot, just waiting for it to end so you can crawl back under the covers, only to repeat the whole thing tomorrow. And that cynicism, ho, buddy, it is real. Remember when you used to be excited about your work? When you had all these big dreams and goals, and now you're literally side-eyeing every new project like, ugh, what is the point? Maybe you even cringe when you see a new email pop up, or you roll your eyes when someone mentions another team meeting. Where there used to be excitement, now there's just dread. You're showing up, you're doing the work, but deep down there's this nagging voice telling you that it doesn't even matter. Like no matter how many hours you put in, it's never enough. You feel like you're constantly behind, playing catch up, and even when you do hit a milestone, you just feel meh and rather apathetic about it. This is the dangerous cycle of burnout, because you push yourself harder because you think that's the solution. You think if you just work a little more, you'll finally catch up and finally get ahead and finally feel satisfied. But that's the lie that burnout tells you. The more you push, the more you start sinking into that exhaustion, the more you start to resent everything you once loved, and the more you feel like you're just not cutting it. The truth, though, and this is coming from someone who's lived through it, you are doing enough. Hell, you're probably doing too much. But when you're in the burnout zone, nothing feels like enough because you're stuck in this loop, always trying to prove yourself, always striving for that next thing, thinking that maybe then you'll feel satisfied. But burnout ain't gonna let you win that game. It's like trying to fill a bucket with holes at the bottom. No matter how much you pour in, it just keeps draining out. So here's the real question. How long are you going to keep pouring before you realize you need to fix the damn bucket? Let's talk about those holes in your bucket. Your burnout triggers or warning signs. Think of them like the flashing check engine light in your car that many of us probably ignore. The one that flickers on and you pretend you don't see it because honestly, who has time to deal with a car issue right now? So you just keep driving. But deep down, it's not going to just magically fix itself. Like the check engine light's not going to turn off just because you want it to. It might not break down today or tomorrow, but eventually, if you keep ignoring it, you're going to be stranded on the side of the road waiting for a tow truck. Burnout works the same way. It gives you plenty of warning signs, but most of us just keep going, thinking we can power through, but we can't. The longer we ignore those flashing lights, the worse the breakdown is going to be. And the truth is, most of us wait until we're already in the breakdown phase to realize what's happening. We wait until we've pushed ourselves so far past our limits that there's no quick fix anymore. And trust me, once you're stranded on the side of the road, metaphorically or literally, it's a hell of a lot harder to fix the engine than if you just pulled over and checked it out when the light first came on. One of the first signs you're on the road to burnout is when you can't seem to say no. You say yes to everything, every project, every favor, every social invite, because deep down, you feel like you have to. Maybe it's that people pleaser in you, terrified of disappointing anyone. Maybe you think being the go-to person will somehow validate you, like if you can handle it all, you'll finally feel worthy of all the praise or promotion you're working toward. Or maybe you've convinced yourself that if you don't do it, no one else will, and the world will fall apart without your superhuman efforts. You might be doing it because you don't want to let others down, but you know who you are letting down? Yourself. When you're constantly agreeing to every request, task, and responsibility, you're spreading yourself so thin that you're not just teetering on the edge, you're basically swan diving into burnout. You've probably heard it before. Every time you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else, usually yourself. You say yes to taking on another work project, but that means saying no to having a relaxing evening or getting enough sleep. You say yes to helping a friend move, but that means saying no to the self-care time you've been desperately needing. It's this constant trade-off. And the problem is when you keep saying yes to everyone else, you end up with nothing left for you. Think of it this way. Saying yes to everything is like downloading every app you come across onto your phone. At first, it doesn't seem like a big deal. One more app can't hurt, right? But eventually, your phone's memory gets maxed out. It starts running slower, apps freeze, and before you know it, the whole system crashes. And that's exactly what happens to you when you're taking on too much. It's only a matter of time before things start freezing up in your life. You'll start dropping the ball, missing deadlines, or simply burning out because you're stretched too thin. You might not even realize it's happening at first because it can feel like you're managing just fine. But under the surface, your brain is running at full capacity, trying to keep track of all those commitments, and your body is starting to feel the strain too. It's just a matter of time before everything crashes, and trust me, when that happens, it's not pretty. You need to start saying no. I know it's hard, especially if you're used to being the go-to person for everything. But if you keep saying yes, you're only delaying the inevitable. The full system shutdown will happen. It's just a matter of when. And trust me, the sooner you learn to set boundaries, the easier it's going to be to protect your mental and physical health. And saying no doesn't have to be this big dramatic thing. You don't need a long explanation or apology. A simple, I'd love to, but I don't have the bandwidth right now is perfectly fine. And if someone can't respect your boundaries, that's on them, not you. It's way easier to start saying no now than to deal with the full system shutdown later. Because once burnout hits, it's not just about catching up on sleep or taking a day off. It's a much deeper recovery process. And if you can avoid that crash by setting boundaries and saying no when you need to, you'll thank yourself later. And let's keep talking about boundaries because if they're nowhere to be found, that's another red flag. Lack of boundaries is like leaving your front door wide open and then wondering why everyone is walking in and making themselves at home. You need boundaries to protect your energy, your time, and your sanity. Now, most of us think we have boundaries, but what we really have are suggestions. Suggestions that we ignore the second a work crisis pops up or our boss sends an urgent email at 10 p.m. Suggestions that crumble when a friend asks us for a favor and we really don't have time for it, but we feel guilty saying no. And every time we push those boundaries aside, we are chipping away at our own well-being. Boundaries are like the fence around your mental and emotional backyard, keeping out the things that drain you and protecting the things inside that restore you. But if you don't put up a sturdy fence, people and work are just going to wander in whenever they feel like it. So do you actually have boundaries or are you constantly letting things bleed into your personal time? Maybe it's staying late at work for just this one time, or maybe it's answering that Slack message during dinner with your family. But these little things add up, and before you know it, there's no line between work and home. It's all just one giant stressful blur. And that, my friend, is a fast track to burnout. And the worst part, when you let your boundaries blur like that, you're teaching the people around you, your coworkers, your boss, your friends, your family, that your time is flexible, that you're always available. So of course they're going to keep pushing. I mean, why wouldn't they? You've shown them that they can, and you'll just roll with it. And it's not their fault. It's yours. I know that's a little harsh, but boundaries are your responsibility to set and enforce. No one else is going to protect your time for you. No one else is going to say, hey, you should really take a break, because guess what? They're all too busy with their own stuff. So if you're not actively setting those boundaries, and more importantly, sticking to them, you're leaving yourself wide open for burnout. So how do you fix it? First, you've got to get clear on what your boundaries actually are. Not what you wish they were or what you tell yourself they are, but what you need them to be. Think about where you feel the most drained. Is it work creeping into your evenings? Is it social obligations when you'd rather be recharging alone? Whatever it is, that's where you need to start putting up some guardrails. Once you set those boundaries, then you have to enforce them. And yeah, that's the tricky part, because setting the boundary isn't the challenge always. It's sticking to it when life inevitably tries to test you. It's saying no to that extra project, even though you want to be seen as a team player. It's letting that email sit in your inbox until morning, even though it's just one quick response. It's choosing you over the constant demands of everyone else. The reality is, if you don't protect your time and energy, no one else will. People will take what you give them, and if you're constantly available, constantly giving your time and energy, don't be surprised when you've got nothing left for yourself. But the more you practice enforcing those boundaries, the easier it gets. At first, it'll feel weird. Maybe you'll feel guilty or like you're letting people down. But when you start seeing the benefits, more energy, less stress, feeling more in control of your time, it'll click. You'll realize that those boundaries aren't walls keeping people out. They're doors that let the right things in when you're ready. So let me ask you this. Where do you need to put up some fences? Where are your boundaries looking a little shaky? Is it with work? With friends? Maybe with yourself? It's time to take a hard look and start protecting your mental backyard. All right, let's switch gears and talk about another big warning sign: running on empty and pretending you're fine. You know that feeling when you're exhausted, mentally checked out, and still pushing through like it's no big deal? Yeah, that's a major red flag. Most of us are really good at ignoring the signs that we're running on fumes. We convince ourselves that we can power through with just a little more coffee, a little more willpower, and maybe a long weekend to catch up on rest. But running on empty isn't something you can just shake off with a nap or a couple of days off. It's actually a sign that burnout is creeping up fast, and if you don't do something about it now, you'll hit a wall sooner rather than later. If you're constantly dragging yourself through the day, counting down the hours until you can literally flop into bed, you're already in burnout territory. Your body and mind are begging you to slow down, but instead of listening, you keep pushing, thinking that you just need to get through tomorrow, the next week, the next month, the next quarter. You get it. The thing is, there's always going to be another busy week. There's always going to be something that needs your attention. And if you keep putting yourself on the back burner, you're eventually going to run out of steam completely. Now, I know the idea of just pushing through is baked into our culture. We're constantly told to hustle harder, work longer, and push ourselves to the limit if we want to be successful. But burnout isn't the price you have to pay for being successful. You don't have to run yourself into the ground just to prove that you're capable or committed. In fact, research has shown the opposite. Chronic stress, like the kind that comes from constantly running on empty, can lead to burnout, which in turn impacts cognitive functioning, your creativity, and your productivity. In other words, burnout actually diminishes your performance over time. And it's not just a mental game either. Burnout has very real physical consequences. I mean, studies have shown that burnout can lead to cardiovascular problems, immune disorders, and even gastrointestinal issues. So when you feel like you're running on empty, that's your body sending up distress signals, and ignoring them can take a serious toll on your health. So what are the warning signs that you're running on empty? I mean, it's not just about feeling tired. Like we talked about earlier, it's that deeper exhaustion where even the things that you normally enjoy start to feel like a chore. It's that constant mental fog where you just can't focus, even when you're staring at the same task for hours. It's that tightness in your chest or those random aches and pains that seem to pop up out of nowhere. All of this happens because burnout doesn't just affect your mind, it affects your body too. It's quite literally a syndrome that results from chronic workplace stress that hasn't been successfully managed, which leads to feelings of energy depletion, increased mental distance from your job, and reduced professional efficacy. But it doesn't just stop at work. Burnout seeps into every aspect of your life, making you feel disconnected, irritable, and emotionally drained. So let's talk about irritability because honestly, it's one of the most common and most ignored warning signs of burnout. It's that feeling when everything and everyone seems to be getting on your last nerve. That's not just you having a bad day or being in a mood. That's your body and mind telling you that something's off. Irritability can be one of the earliest signs that burnout is creeping up on you, and if you're snapping at people more than usual, it might be time to take a closer look at what's really going on. When you're running on empty, even the smallest things can set you off. Your coworker sends a perfectly reasonable email, and you want to throw your phone across the room. Your partner asks you what you want for dinner, and suddenly you're in a full-blown argument over pasta. Or maybe it's your kids, your friends, or even the poor barista who just spelled your name wrong. Everyone's driving you up the wall, and you don't know why. Here's why. When you're burnt out, your emotional reserves are depleted. You literally don't have the patience or capacity to deal with life's usual ups and downs because you're already stretched too thin. Irritability is your mind's way of saying, I'm overwhelmed and I can't handle anything else right now. Basically, burnout makes you emotionally raw. And without proper care, that irritability can spill over into every area of your life. The only way to fix it is by addressing the root cause, your burnout. That means taking steps to slow down, reset, and recharge before the irritability becomes something more serious, like anxiety or depression. So before you snap at the next person who breathes too loudly near you, take a moment to listen to what your irritability is really trying to tell you. So before we wrap this up, let's do a quick check-in. How are you really feeling right now? If you're already in the danger zone, I want you to make one small commitment to take care of you before everything else crumbles. Please. Burnout isn't inevitable, but it does take some serious self-awareness to avoid falling into the danger zone. Recognizing your triggers is step 1. Owning the fact that you can't do it all without losing your sanity is step 2. And step 3, actually doing something about it. When you start listening to your body and prioritizing yourself, you'll wonder why you didn't start sooner. Hey, listen, if you loved today's episode and found it helpful, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. It helps me keep bringing the tough love and snark that you know and love. All right, here's what I want you to do right after this episode. Head over to my website and grab your free burnout quiz. It's time to figure out where you're at before things get messy. I'll be sure to leave the link in the show notes. I'll catch you later, badass.
Thanks for hanging out with me on the Balanced Badass podcast. I hope today's episode brought you a little more balance and a lot more badass in your day. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, share it with a friend, and leave a review. Your support helps more multitaskers like you find the show, and I'd really appreciate it. Until next time, take care of yourself and make good choices, friend. I'll catch you next week.